Good evening and welcome to Friday. I'm back with another story from my book, Dark Fragments. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the night with a story I call Love's Fury. The sun was just starting to rise as he pulled into the drive. He had driven steadily through the warm June night for the past 20 hours to reach Stevensville from Houston, where he had moved with his family 2 years before. He was 15 when they left, and although too young to have a say regarding the move, he was not too young to feel the heartbreaking pains of true love separated. Yesterday, before he left Houston, he had a big fight with his parents. They were totally against his going to Michigan to be with her. They wanted him to go to college and get a degree. His mother had kept pounding on the fact that she wanted him to live and have a life before he let himself be tied down. He did not feel tied down with Jennifer, and he did not want them to run his life. This he had made perfectly clear as he stormed out of the house. He was just pulling out of the driveway when his father came running out of the house in his robe and grabbed his arm through the window. "Don't try to stop me, Dad. I'm going, and that's all there is to it. Jennifer's in trouble, and she needs me." The look on his face was one of sheer determination. "I know, Steve, I know." His father looked him in the eye and handed him a roll of money. "Just be careful, and come back to us, son." He stood back and put his hands in his pockets. Steve looked down at the roll of bills and at his father. Maybe he did understand. "Thanks, Dad." He pulled out of the drive and headed north. He watched as his dad faded in the mirror and began the task of driving to Michigan. Steve thought about yesterday's events as he switched off the headlights and set the brake. That had been easy, and he hoped that the drive here was the hardest thing he would have to face. When Jennifer had called, she'd been vague about the trouble she was having. She had said that there was no immediate danger, but she really needed him to be there. So, he hit the road. Slowly he walked up the drive and around the old Chevy parked in the carport. Someone was up and bustling around the kitchen. He could smell fresh brewed coffee and see toast in the toaster. He knocked lightly on the screen door and heard Jennifer's mother, Vicky, come into the door. "Jesus Christ, can't nobody even get a bite of breakfast before the world comes a-knocking?" She paused and looked through the door, putting her hand on her hair curlers. "Oh my God! Would you look at this? Boy, have you grown! And what's that furry thing under your nose?" She opened the door and stood back looking at him. "Well, come on in and sit down. I knew you and Jennifer were still talking, but I never thought you'd come back here." She poured coffee and he gratefully accepted a steaming cup. "So what brings you back?" "Jennifer called me yesterday and said she was in trouble. I was planning on coming back this summer, but it sounded like it was important. Where is she?" He looked around. "Trouble?" She seemed confused. "There's no trouble I know of. She recently got her inheritance from her dear old grandpa, but I don't know of any trouble." Steve's mind spun. "She got an inheritance?" "She sure did. Her grandfather, my father, I hope they put some ice water in his casket, left her almost $1 million. Sorry old dog left me and her sister $1 each just so we couldn't contest the will. You know, Shelley's my husband's daughter, and she never got along with Gramps. Always called him an old fart bag." She was mumbling into her coffee cup. "So where is she now?" Steve asked urgently. He had a bad feeling that the trouble Jennifer was having had something to do with Shelley and the inheritance. "Oh, they called about an hour ago. That's why I'm up, see? Couldn't go back to sleep." "Who called?" Steve was getting edgy. The lack of sleep from the drive and worry were working him overtime. "From where?" "Shelley called from the club. They went out last night to celebrate and closed it down. She called and said Jennifer had invited her and Bert to go with her and rent a boat to watch the sunrise from offshore." She got up for more coffee. "Didn't Jennifer tell you I was coming?" He looked up as she shook her head. "When she called yesterday morning, I told her I was on my way and should be here this morning. Knowing that, I'm sure she would have waited for me." "Yeah, it does sound strange, but then again, she was celebrating. Maybe she doesn't figure on you being here until later." Steve got up and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Vicky called out. He stopped and turned around. "What happens to the money if something happens to Jennifer?" Why, I suppose it'd be split between Shelley and myself, but what? Her words were cut off by the slamming of the screen door, and she looked up to see him pull out of the drive in a cloud of tire smoke. Driving to the docks where they were supposed to be, he prayed he wasn't too late. Jennifer had told him about Bert, Shelley's boyfriend, who was manipulating and abusive. She had said that he was cruel and had Shelley under his thumb. Knowing that Shelley would stand to gain if something happened to Jennifer, and that Bert had control of Shelley, made his mind reel with the possibilities. Maybe he was wrong, but Jennifer knew that he was coming to town. The parking lot was crowded with the cars of fishermen who were here for the charter boat fishing trips, and he had to park on the street. He slammed the door of his car and ran towards the Reynolds shack. "Hey, buddy, wait your turn," an irate fisherman yelled as he butted his way to the counter. "Excuse me." He motioned to the girl behind the counter. "I'm sorry, sir, but you'll have to get in line." She turned back to the customer in front of her. "This is an emergency, damn it," he growled. "I don't want to rent a boat. I just need to know if a guy and two girls rented a boat." "They went to Slip 13 about 10 minutes ago. If you're going with them, I'll need a copy of your driver's license and $25. She looked up, but he was already gone. He spotted Shelley casting off the bow line of a fishing boat and ran toward it. Just as the boat pulled from the dock, he jumped and landed on the aft deck. Momentum carried him across the deck and into the fighting chair where he barked his shin, but he didn't let the pain stop him. He turned forward to see Bert standing there with his hands on the controls, looking back at him in surprise. Shelley was already there beside him, but Jennifer was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Jennifer?" His tone was menacing and he was prepared to fight. "Who the hell are you?" Bert stepped toward him just as he heard Jennifer bang on the cabin door from inside and call his name. She sounded scared and pleading, and this angered him. "Why is she locked in the cabin, Shelley?" He ignored Bert for the moment. Shelley took a step back involuntarily and looked at her boyfriend. Bert lunged across the deck at Steve and tried to tackle him, but Steve saw it coming and stepped back. As Bert sailed past, Steve reached out with his right fist and connected with the side of Bert's head as hard as he could. This sent the maniac reeling into the engine cover, knocking it loose. A scream of rage and a movement from the corner of his eye caused Steve to turn just as Shelley swiped at him with her nails. 4 streaks of pain seared across his cheek like fire as Jennifer once again called out to him. He reacted out of rage and slugged Shelley hard just above the nose. She looked surprised for a moment, a look that any other time would have been funny, and sank to the deck in a heap. Remembering Bert, Steve turned in time to see the motor cover coming down on his head and fell to the deck, dazed. Bert, taking advantage of his foe's incapacitation, jumped on him and began to beat his head against the deck. Slowly, Steve reached up to find a vulnerable spot while fighting to stay conscious. His hands found Bert's face and he pressed his thumbs into his eyes. Bert shrieked with pain and threw himself backwards, carrying Steve over onto him. Steve reached around the throat of the bigger Bert and clamped his arms together. As Bert struggled to free himself, Steve prayed that the moves on TV wrestling were real because he was attempting to render his opponent unconscious with a sleeper hold. The struggling weakened, and finally Bert slumped to the deck. Jennifer was crying softly now, and he crawled across the deck to the cabin door. When it opened, he was amazed to see that his pretty little Jenny had grown into a very beautiful woman since he last saw her. She hugged him tight and helped him to the controls. They docked the boat, and Steve sank back into the chair. The events of the past day had left him exhausted. Jennifer was standing beside him and started to tell him what happened. "They were going to kill me. Shelley was jealous that Grandpa had left me so much and nothing for her, so they came up with a plan to drown me and report it as an accident," she sobbed against his shoulder. "I was sure you'd never get here in time." "Hey, babe, I'm here. That's all that matters. I'm here." Steve smelled gas and looked to the engine. Apparently, when Bert tore the cover off the motor, he had ripped a fuel line. The fuel was pooling on top of the engine. If it dripped onto the hot exhaust, there would be a fire. "Come on, we got to get out of here." He led her off the boat and onto the dock as flames burst out of the engine. They moved a safe distance up the dock, and Steve hollered for help. He saw men coming with fire extinguishers and turned back to hold his still crying Jenny. "It's okay, baby. It's over now," he said, repeating the soothing words to calm her. He was looking over her shoulder at the boat when the fuel tank exploded, and the flash blinded him momentarily. He felt Jennifer stiffen, gasp, and then become limp in his arms. He sank down to his knees holding her, still unable to see. He called to her, but she was silent. He pressed his ear to her mouth, but there was no breath. One of the men arrived with a fire extinguisher and stopped beside them. "Well, I guess I don't need this," he said, and set the fire extinguisher down. The blaze held his attention as he spoke to Steve. "You kids all right?" he asked, and turned to look at the couple kneeling together on the dock. He saw the girl was limp and the boy was crying silently. Then he noticed the jagged piece of metal protruding from her back. Thank you for spending your time with me. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll be sure to join the conversation. That's all for tonight, but I'll be back next week with another tale from my collection. So until then, sleep well.